The viewer is where Nuke displays the results of your composite. To connect the viewer, click on a node and hit one of the number keys along the top of the keyboard. I'm hitting 1. This has connected this node to the first input of the viewer node. You can connect multiple views, as many as 10. So click this, and I'm hitting 2 to connect the second input. I'm going to click this, and I'm going to hit 3 to connect the third input. So all the way from 1 to the 0 key on the top of the keyboard, you can connect to the viewer node. You can have multiple viewer nodes as well, but usually one is sufficient. To toggle between the views in the viewer, hover the mouse pointer over the viewer and then hit the number key again, and it will toggle through those views. To toggle through the channels of the image, you can use R for red channel, G for green, and B for blue, and that'll preview the red, green, and blue. A will show you the alpha channel, and hitting any key twice will toggle back to the full view. So this is red, and I hit R again, and it shows me everything. Let's talk about the controls along the outside of the view window. This first pull down controls which layer is being sent to the viewer. Nuke can support multiple layers and channels, but they're not exactly analogous to perhaps the types of layers you're familiar with in a program like Photoshop. In Nuke, layers, which are typically called arbitrary output variables in computer graphics, are not explicitly composited within the format that they come in through. So a few formats support multiple layers like EXR, Photoshop format, and TIFF. They show up here as possible layers for display, and you can select them and send them to the viewer. So let's select depth here, and we'll send that layer. The second pull down controls which channel is being mapped to the alpha channel of the viewer. The viewer can only display 4 channels at once: red, green, blue, and alpha. So if you would like to map this to something else, say for example the depth channel, you can do that. And now when I hit the A key, it will preview the depth channel for me rather than previewing the alpha channel. So let's put this back to alpha. This pull down is what we were toggling when we're hitting the red, green, blue, and alpha key. It also has a couple of other interesting modes. Matte overlay that you can get by hitting M, which shows you a rubylith preview of the alpha channel over the RGB. And it also has luminance only mode, which you can bring up by hitting Y. So this is only showing us the luminance of the image. This is very useful sometimes when tuning a comp, to only look at the luminance and to disregard the color. The input process node toggles on and off the input process if you have one defined for the scene, and we'll talk about that later in the term. This is the viewer process for the view and controls which LUT is being used to display the image. Remember, I mentioned that Nuke is always working in a linear light color space. Linear light is not directly viewable on a standard computer monitor, so we need to put a LUT on the viewer so that it will properly present the image for the monitor. This is the default, which is sRGB. Most monitors are calibrated to sRGB, so this is the correct LUT to select. If you have a studio monitor, you could also select Rec 709, which will put a Rec 709 LUT on it. If you're interested to see what a linear light image looks like with no LUT, this is what it looks like. Now keep in mind, this is only for the display. These controls related to the viewer do not affect the buffers that are in memory and that get written to disk. They only affect what is being put up to the screen. So these LUTs are only for the screen. Moving down the line, we have these two inputs, which allows you to take, when you have multiple inputs into the viewer, say for example 1 and 2, and you would like to wipe between the two, you can select the wipe option and you can inspect between the two. You have several other options as well, like the difference or over, or you can onion scan. So you can use this to compare two inputs that are connected to the viewer. There is also the provision for putting safe area overlays on the image. So if you're doing work for television, you can turn on action and title safe masks to make sure that you are composing your image correctly. This will allow you to put up masks, aspect ratio masks. If you are working on, for example, full aperture 35mm and you're going to do an extraction, this will let you see the frame lines for the extraction that you'll be doing in the end. This option will put zebra stripes on to show areas that are overexposed. If you have proxies defined, this will select the proxy mode. This turns on full frame processing, which is more relevant when you are doing animation. By default, Nuke only processes the pixels that are in frame. So if this is not selected and something is outside of the view, it will not calculate those pixels down here. So even though this is buffered, if I move the frame now, it will unbuffer because it hasn't calculated them. So turning on full frame processing forces it to process the entire frame even if it's not visible. So now, once I've rendered this flipbook or RAM player, I can position and scale the frame and it will always stay buffered. This is the manual update button, which is mostly useful when you are using the pause control, because sometimes a composite will get so heavy that you don't want it to update constantly when you're moving sliders. So you can pause updates, and then when you are ready to update, you can hit the manual update button and manually update the frame. The hotkey for this is U, so you can hover here and hit U and manually update. And the hotkey for pause is P. So you can toggle that on and off using the P key. This is the region of interest tool, which will allow you to find a specific region of interest for rendering. So now it will only update things that are inside this box. And these controls are all useful when you start to build very heavy comps and you don't want to render the whole thing, or you want to control when the updates occur. This is the zoom level, and you can select it from the menu, or you can do it interactively. The paradigm is just like the node graph. If you hold down the Alt key and middle click and drag left and right, it will zoom smoothly. Holding down middle mouse and clicking and dragging will pan. The mouse wheel up and down will zoom. You can also use hotkeys for zoom. So if I want to snap the whole zoom to 1:1, 1 pixel equals 1 pixel on screen, I can hold Control 1 and it will snap it 1:1, 100% zoom. Control 2, 200% zoom. Or to zoom out, Alt 2, 50%, Alt 3, 33%, Alt 4, 25%, and so on. The hotkeys are defined here. You can also render in a sub-resolution mode, down res, if you only want to render every other pixel or every fourth pixel or every eighth pixel. So let's do every fourth pixel. So now the updates will be a little quicker. This is useful if you're need to get a quick flipbook out just to check motion or something, or to do a preview. The next set of controls are related to the gain and gamma of the view. So if you'd like to adjust the brightness, the overall gain of the viewer, you can use this slider here. And you'll notice how this value turns red, the f-stop, as you go down. That means that it's been changed from the default. If you'd like to reset it, simply click it and it will reset. So remember, these controls only control the view. These have nothing to do with the data in the actual buffers of Nuke. This is so that you can inspect your output, but it's not actually editing the data in RAM that will be output to disk. This is the gamma control. So you can gamma up and down for gamma slamming to inspect your comp. This control controls if the viewer is in 2D or 3D mode. Nuke has a full 3D system built in, and we'll talk about this in more detail later in the term. Let's go back to 2D mode. You have the timeline, which we've already interacted with a little bit, and it has controls, VCR controls that allow you to play, stop, play backwards, frame forward, frame backwards, go to the next keyframe, or the previous keyframe, go to the next keyframe of whatever the selected node is. The properties have to be in the properties bin for that, or go to the beginning, or go to the end. You can also set in and out points using these buttons that will set an in and out point in the timeline, so you can look at some subset and only do a RAM player of that subset. When this is active, this button here will become active, and you can toggle it on and off the keyframes that you've defined using this button. This controls how the playback will loop. You can either loop it or ping pong back and forth, or just have it stop when it hits the end, or continue, and it will just continue playing indefinitely beyond the defined timeline that you have, or global time. You can control how much of the timeline you're viewing here. You can look at the global time, which is what's defined in the project, or just the input time. So if you have a clip that's only 10 frames long, you can inspect the clip directly by clicking here and looking at just the input. This is only 1 frame, so it's only showing 1 frame. You can look at the in and out on the clip, or only what's visible. You can control what type of time representation you want here, frames or time code. I prefer frames. And then this controls the frame rate to play back the timeline, which is defined in the globals here, the properties for the composite. It will automatically pick those up, or you can override them in the viewer. This will allow you to generate a flipbook, which creates an ephemeral write node and renders it out. And this will allow you to save a RAM player that you've already created. This controls whether or not the viewers' timelines are locked. So if you have multiple viewers and this is locked like this, it will have all of their times be locked. If you disable it, then they can each have their own time sliders. So that's the overview of the viewer, the 2D features. We'll talk more about navigation in 3D when we get to the end of the term and we're working in 3D.